I have to start with this quote from Maya Angelou: "Know better, do better," is so true. And so, as we learn more about history and more about being culturally responsive, there can be a tendency to be like, "Oh, I've screwed up so many times." And I think about that in my own life. Um, my son Trip is in fourth grade, and when he was in, I can't remember if it was kindergarten or first grade, he definitely participated in his school play at school, wearing the Indian paper bag vest. And I was enough aware of things that I knew it was wrong, but I didn't have the language yet to describe why, or to be brave enough in that moment to say to his teachers, like, we shouldn't be doing this. I don't want him to participate. And I really regret that, but I can't like stay stuck in that regret. We have to just say, oh, I learned something. I'm going to be better at it next time. So I hope that you'll take this in with that kind of view of like, I've messed up, but it's all right. This is really just about learning. That's what we are. That's our whole goal as teachers. I also want to say to you that like, I've done everything I can to look at primary sources and then to look at respected, well-known sources from multiple different places. But there could be things I have wrong too. Like I'm doing the research the best I can, but I'm going into this acknowledging I'm not an expert, and there might be things that I'm getting wrong. And so if you find something that's different, share it, and kind of let's figure out where it's coming from. I'll try to share things that we know from primary sources, and then things that we know from looking at all kinds of other sources, and historians' best guesses. So going into that with this, knowing that it may not be perfect, and it's all about knowing better and doing better. So we're going to start with the pre-assessment. You don't have to share your answers at all, but I'd like for you to, if you can write it down, write it down. And if not, just keep it in your mind. But go ahead and take this little pre-assessment for yourself. You don't need to put it in the chat. Just try these 3 questions. And then after we look at some of the primary sources about Thanksgiving, hopefully you'll be able to answer them accurately. So I'll just pause for a second and let you do that. All right, so we're going to look at some information from primary sources about what we know about Thanksgiving, because I feel like it's important to represent this history accurately to our students. But I do need to say a little bit of background information before these 2 primary sources, things that we know, kind of basics. So we know that in 1620, about 102 English people came to Massachusetts, that coast, northern coast. And half of them were listed as pilgrims, people who were, going on this journey for their religious beliefs. The other half of them were actually called strangers, and they were, in the history, and they were actually there because seeking what other English people came, or other Europeans came, seeking land and fortune and those kinds of things. So about half of them were actually pilgrims, and it was rough, right? They were, hold on. They arrived in December. What a terrible time to, start a colony. And they were kind of ill prepared. And they ended up settling in a place that used to be a native village that had been totally decimated, like totally kicked out because of disease that were brought over, most likely from diseases that were brought over from earlier settlers. So they settled in this place. They ended up being visited by 2 different natives who knew English, and because of like their prior interactions with them. And they did, it is true that the natives there at that time, the Wampanoag Indians, helped them survive. They sort of, the Wampanoag had other tribes around them that they were not, like sort of their enemies. And so I think they saw the English as an opportunity to be an ally. And so they were helpful to each other. They created this treaty, and then what happened here that we can read about in these 2 primary sources is really a harvest celebration that happened in 1621, kind of after that survival. Half of the people died, so we were down to 50 settlers. But that's kind of the context of where these 2 primary sources are coming from. One being a letter by Winslow, which was written 2 months after. And he was actually a passenger on the Mayflower. He was an eyewitness eyewitness. He was there, and this was from a letter he wrote to a friend. And then the other one was written 9 years later. And we're going to dig into what we can learn about what is called the first Thanksgiving by looking at the primary source on the left. So here's what it looks like up close. I don't know about you, but I can't really read that, right? Thanks to the spelling and the shape of the letter. Some of the letters are different. So here is a version that has been changed into our current spelling, and I'm going to play it so we can listen to it. Give me a thumbs up if you hear it once it's started.
Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, that so we might, after a more special manner, rejoice together, after we had gathered the fruit of our labours. They 4 in one day killed as much fowl, as with a little help beside, served the company almost a week, at which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms, many of the Indians coming amongst us, and amongst the rest their greatest king Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted, and they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation, and bestowed on our governor, and upon the captain, and others. And although it be not always so plentiful, as it was at this time with us, yet by the goodness of God, we are so far from want, that we often wish you partakers of our plenty.
Okay. I don't know about you, but still hard to understand, like, what are they really saying, right? So we're going to unpack a little bit of that and see if we can figure out what do we know to be true based on this is a primary source. And let's step back for just 1 second and say that when we look at the history, the social studies standards for all of the state standards, all of them have that 0.1 standard. That is a process standard in every single grade level. And so what we're doing here is enacting those process standards of like looking at primary sources, seeing what artifacts tell us, what writings tell us, that kind of thing. So we're sort of doing that process of history here. Okay. All right. So this first piece, so we might after a special manner rejoice together after we had gathered the fruits of our labors. So this one tells us that it wasn't like they set out to call this day Thanksgiving. It wasn't like they were like, let's have a Thanksgiving feast. It was a harvest feast. It was like, look at how much we have, how we've been able to survive. And what it was really just a harvest feast and less about being called this first Thanksgiving. We know here it says they killed fowl, which is birds, and then the Native Americans brought 5 deer. So looking into that a little bit more. So it doesn't say here, right, what fowl, what kind of birds we had, but looking into other records of what they would have eaten at the time. They probably did have turkey, but it wasn't like the big plump juicy turkey that we had. It was a wild turkey, and so those are kind of scrawny and ugly, right? Probably could have been goose or duck. And then in another source, which I think is that the one that was on the right, and there, that one mentioned cod, bass, other fish. So they lived on the coast, so lots and lots of seafood would have been part of their particular feast. Corn, cranberries. Those are some of the things that we would know based on other records of what they were eating at the time. Okay. At which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms. So they did fun stuff. Recreations means they were like playing and doing games and things. So based on other records of what was happening, maybe there was wrestling, maybe there was racing. I did read that like the Native Americans created something like a football out of deer skin and stuffed it with like animal fur. We don't know if there would have been football, but could have been. The exercising of the arms means like shooting guns, showing off their guns, and maybe I don't know what. And then I read something called stool ball. Very interested in what that might be. That was an English game. So they were hanging out doing fun stuff, which is not too far from what we might do on our Thanksgiving, right? Okay, many of the Indians coming amongst us. So we don't know like exactly how they got there. Were they invited? We don't know. Did they hear the guns going off and they were like, what the heck is going on? Let's go see. We don't know why, but they were there. That was one of the theories, is that they may have heard the guns and decided to come. Amongst the rest, their greatest king Massasoit, and with some 90 men. Okay, so their their king came, and then they brought 90 men. We don't know, maybe there could have been more, maybe women and children came too, but we do have that number. And we do know that there would have been right around 50 of the English people at that time that were left. We're going to call them pilgrims, but we know that maybe not all of them were actually pilgrims. Some of them were just there to try to have a better, economic opportunity. And then check it out. It lasted for 3 days. It wasn't just one afternoon and then take a nap. It was 3 whole days of this harvest. Thanks, Hercules, for the laugh. I appreciate it. And, I think an interesting point to keep in mind is that they spoke different languages. We know there were natives who spoke English, but they were united against, they were united because of a common enemy, but we don't necessarily know much about their, the language and all that. Okay, so those are the things that we can tell from primary sources. And the interesting thing is that, a whole lot of myths have developed out of that. That's really all we have. But all these other myths have come up. So we're going to try to dispel some of those things and figure out what things are true, what things are facts when it comes to that first Thanksgiving. So now it's celebrated at the end of November, but this isn't a huge deal, but the first Thanksgiving actually took place in October. Okay. And this idea of like re-celebrating it every year came much later. That wasn't like the next year, they're like, let's do it again. So on this picture, when you look at it, you can see this is just someone's depiction, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-ish pilgrims, and then one lonely Native American right there. We know that that's not the ratio that would have really happened, right? If there were about 90 Native men, and then about 50 pilgrims, including a whole lot of children as part of that. Here's maybe a little bit more of an accurate representation of the ratio of who was actually there. I don't know. I wonder about what's true in this picture, but at least the ratio is a little more accurate, you can see. In this picture, who knows what heck kind of book this came from, but I found this picture. So this idea of popcorn came out of nowhere, just completely not true. And like there weren't apples. We do know that like this idea of pumpkin pie and all that, there wasn't really much sugar to be had. So a lot of the things that are traditional to us would not have been the kinds of things that they would have eaten. Definitely not popcorn. It came out of I did a little looking, and from what I could tell, someone wrote like a historical fiction story, and there was this little story about a Native American bring like a brother to Squanto bringing popcorn, and that was a fake story, but then it just sort of got retold as true out of this historical fiction book. I feel like this picture is really misleading. The headdress thing would not have, that's for special times, maybe not even the Wampanoag Indians. I read that the Pilgrims didn't actually have buckles on their hats. Certainly the Wampanoag Indians didn't have teepees. They lived in wigwams. Like everything is wrong with this picture. So when we use images like this, it sort of takes this very diverse idea of, Native peoples being just a humongous diversity of cultures and people and customs and dress and housing, and boiling it down to this one thing that really misleads kids of who Native Americans are. So we just want to avoid images like this. And it also makes kids, their idea of what a Native American is stuck in one place in the past. This picture, they were enjoying a feast together. They were, it was potentially a positive time, but like this, like, oh, we're buddies forever and ever, is also a misleading image. Within like a few years, I know by, I think the 1670s, they were at war again and they were getting, massacred. So it didn't last long, basically, is what we're saying. So I think it's important that when you choose, if you're going to choose images to represent it this first Thanksgiving at all, think clearly through what your images are saying. And is it sharing a myth or a fact. All right, we'll take a little comedic break. This little clip is suggested by Mr. Prophet, who has a love for the West Wing.
Have either of you heard of, the Jamestown Mayflower Daughters of the American Revolution Preservation Society?
The Jamestown Mayflower Daughters?
I may have gotten the name wrong. They're inviting the White House to participate in some kind of, Thanksgiving Revolutionary War reenactment.
CJ, let's not torture American history completely to death.
Who the hell
Jamestown was the 16th century. The Mayflower landed at Plymouth in the 17th century. The fathers of the Daughters of the American Revolution fought in the 18th century.
It's a festival feast of some kind. Who cares?
Somebody needs to learn the true meaning of Thanksgiving.
Reenactment.
Oh my gosh, I just love it. Okay. Maybe if you haven't seen the West Wing, it wouldn't be as funny, but okay. Thank you for that. Oh, we don't need to see it again.
Have either of you heard of, something?
Okay. So take a look back at your pre-assessment if you were here at the beginning. At the first Thanksgiving, how many Native American men were there? Call it out. Unmute yourself.
About 90. About 90.
About 90. Good. How many English people were there?
About 50.
About
Sorry.
50. Good. How long did the first Thanksgiving last?
3 days.
3 days. Good. Not just one afternoon. And somebody tell us what's different or the same about the food that they would have enjoyed and you enjoy on Thanksgiving.
There's no sugar.
Yeah.
So no pies, no anything. No sweet potatoes with marshmallows.
No popcorn.
Cranberry and recreation would be something that would be the same.
And turkey. Because the wild turkey, I've had wild turkey before, and you can get actually a big meaty wild turkey if you are lucky. My ex-husband was a hunter. It's not that good though, I'm just saying.
Hercules, you said beer?
Oh no, I said deer.
Deer. Okay. I was like, I think there probably was some ale involved, but yeah.
I don't actually know.
Yeah. Definitely deer. Yep. Okay, good. Thanks, y'all. Okay. So let's just have one or two people share. What is something that you learned that you feel like, oh, I can take that and directly apply it in my classroom with students?
I don't have a classroom with students, but the thing that I would directly apply was the picture that you showed that had like the TVs and headdresses, and just be like, Native Americans are not a homogeneous group. There's multiple nations, multiple cultures within what we call Native Americans, and just plunking them down with the teepee and the headdresses is not a representation of Native Americans as a whole, and especially not the Native Americans that took part in what we call the first Thanksgiving.
Perfect. One more person want to share? All right.
So one thing that I have done is when I'm picking images to represent Thanksgiving, I'm no longer using the ones that Tracy showed earlier. So know better, do better.
That's perfect. That's a easy but important change. I love it. All right, Hercules is going to share a little bit from the Native Americans' perspective.
All right. First thing that I want to say is that Ms. Prophet, you really hit the nail on the head when you said like that the Wampanoag and the English were probably together on this day, but then may have been at war later. From what I can tell, the first actual reference that used the word Thanksgiving in the United States was actually in reference to a massacre of Native Americans, and they were giving thanks for the colonists were giving thanks for basically winning this war, but basically massacring an entire village of Native Americans. And then as far as really what struck me in talking to my nephew, who is a Wampanoag Native American, he said, remember that we are still here. We teach this as if it's history and that this is all long gone. Well, okay, so the first Thanksgiving maybe is long gone, but the people, the Wampanoag people and Native Americans as a whole are still here, and they're still fighting for their rights. They're still fighting for their land. They're still fighting for what America and Americans have stole from them. And beyond that, what one of the things that just completely blows my mind is the last time that I checked with Hartman, Wampanoag, the group that literally greeted the pilgrims that had the first Thanksgiving are not recognized by the U.S. government as an official Native American nation, which is just crazy to me. So they're not recognized, so they can't get any of the benefits that a formally recognized Native American group can get from the government. But they're there, and these are the same people that have always been up in Massachusetts, that they still have the same traditions, they still follow the same traditions, and they deserve to be not only recognized by the government, but also recognized by us as educators, as human beings that are still struggling in this country.
Thanks for sharing that, Hercules. Yeah, and as I was reading, I saw that some Native Americans choose to call Thanksgiving, instead of a day of Thanksgiving, they call it a day of mourning, because they think about what has happened after that, before and after that, to their people. And just so that it has been clearly been said, I alluded to it at the beginning, this idea that, what has felt like a tradition for us of making feather or paper headdresses and dressing up as pilgrims and Indians. We just have to keep, why is that wrong? Basically, I want to make sure it's been said that people's traditions and cultures and customs are not costumes. And if we boil down this huge diverse culture into this one representation, that's really disrespectful and it's really misleading. So there are plenty of other ways that we can celebrate Thanksgiving, celebrate being thankful, celebrate history. But let's just truly avoid that one of boiling it down to a costume.
Tracy, can I add one quick thing?
Yeah.
So I was working with a student and we were reading about Andrew Jackson and that piece of history. I think it's really powerful to know all the history of what happened to the Indians because of the blatant disregard for their culture and their well-being and their feelings and how they were completely decimated and moved out of their homes, and the Trail of Tears, and how the white people, men, did not care at all. And they just cared about settlement and about power. And so I think it's really important to hold on to that feeling of, oh my gosh, and I'm not sure how many people really connect them, but for us to say, oh, Thanksgiving and let's celebrate, I think is pretty disrespectful with regard to what happened actually to the Indians and the Trail of Tears, and all of that is just really disheartening. So anyway, sorry, just wanted to add.
Definitely. Thanks, Pam. All right. So with our few minutes we have left, we have, I think, focused on some things not to do. So we're going to sort of see what can we replace that with? What should we do? I think an easy place to start is to focus on gratitude, focus on thankfulness. We can still do that. That's awesome. Right. So think about ways to incorporate that into your classroom, what you do with students. We also have multiple copies of these two books. These books are about being thankful, but they're from the Native American perspective, written by Native American authors. And they're also highly recommended by Native American, teachers and researchers and everything. They don't focus on the first Thanksgiving. They focus on ways that Native American people in general demonstrate thankfulness. So I have these, and we're, love for you to borrow them. There's also great read alouds online on YouTube that you can have. And I have a copy of this book in my office, and there's also, I saw a copy in the library. If you are like, ooh, I need to learn some more, this is a great place to start. It's written for students, like probably 4th or 5th grade students, but I think it's a pretty comprehensive story. I think actually, Hercules, you said your nephew is in this book, maybe a picture of him.
Yeah. There's some family and friends in that book. So yeah, it's a pretty good book.
Yeah, so it was written. It's a well trusted source, right? Written from people from the Plymouth Plantation, Wampanoag, National Geographic, and then the Plymouth Plantation like museum. I forget exactly what it's called. Have created this interactive. Trip and I did it this morning. He was enthralled. It was so good, so good, and talked about the primary sources and the artifacts, and definitely check it out. It's probably for like second and up, and it does take a while. It was probably 30 or more minutes, but it was fantastic. So it's linked there. We'll skip this part. And then two other ideas are just that it's a fantastic idea to expose students to the idea that Native Americans are still here, that they are still a really important part of our country and our culture. So exposing them to current day Native Americans who are doing awesome things. So with a quick Google search, you can find excellent resources about that. Also on the LCS religious and cultural calendar, there's a link to some reading passages from ReadWorks, which I hadn't been a member of it, but I signed in. It was easy to find. So there's some good passages to read there. So I just want to say thank you for being here. Thanks for taking your time to learn about the true story of Thanksgiving, how we can be making sure that we are decentering this myth and telling more of the truth and centering the Native American perspective. And I think that your students have a lot to benefit from you being here. So thank you very much.